All right, I got the top of the hour. Why don't we go ahead and get started here? Wow, what a group. This is great. I noticed there's some obstructed seating back here. Did you guys pay like $30 to be here? These are cheap seats back here. Well, welcome to everybody. How's the conference going? All right? Yeah? You guys enjoying it? That's good. So, let me tell you what we're in here to do. I've actually got the next two sessions, so this one and the one that follows it, and they kind of glue together. And the idea is to really take you from 0 to 100 miles an hour in technologies that we don't typically use as SharePoint developers. You know, I'm like a lot of you guys, right? I've been in this business for 10 years. That's pretty much all I do is SharePoint for the last 10 years. And I have a tremendous investment in the server-side object model, right? Done a lot of that stuff. And now all of a sudden they come along and tell us, well, you need to start learning how to do things without being on the server. So most of us have done some JavaScript stuff, right? So who's written some JavaScript code? Everybody's hand goes up. Yeah, see, we've written some JavaScript code. How many people know what a closure is? Few hands go up, see? So that's the thing we're in here to do, is we're in here to teach you how to write JavaScript correctly, and in so give you some patterns that you can use for writing apps in the new world where, JavaScript is now a core SharePoint development skill. Before we get into that in any real detail, give me 2 seconds here just to give you a little introduction if you haven't had a chance to meet me. My name is Scott Hillier. This is my contact information up there. Feel free to send me an email if you have some follow-up questions on what we're doing. I'm a SharePoint MVP. As I said, I really do nothing but SharePoint for the past 10 years. All I do is write SharePoint code every day. I spend these days, about a quarter of my time doing training for critical path training. Ted and Andrew, buddies of mine for a long time. I spend about 75% of my time doing real project work. So I like to think that the training part allows me to have a nice wide view of the product, right? Because you have to touch everything when you're doing training. And that the actual project work gives me a deep dive into various pieces of it. So I spend a lot of time with Surge and BCS. And in the last year, I've written more JavaScript than I've probably written in my entire life. Right? So this is a very significant thing, and I'm glad to see you guys are here and sort of recognize that. So let's go ahead and get started. A couple of things. All the code for this session, as well as the one after it, and indeed my third one today on search, is available at hillier.codeplex.com. Please don't download it now. Okay? We're already having internet problems. All right, save that for later. You can get it all up there. It's one big giant zip file. It's the recommended download. You can grab it. Okay, and here's our agenda. Here's what we're going to do in the next hour and 15. We're going to talk about JavaScript, HTML5, and CSS, but specifically here, the idea is that this presentation is targeted at SharePoint developers, with my idea being that SharePoint developers have done some JavaScript, we do some CSS, right? We dabble in all these things. But typically what we've done in the past is we sort of glued stuff together. So somebody says, oh, there's no really good way to do this in the server object model. Can't you just glue some stuff together, use a little JavaScript? In 2010, SharePoint 2010, we may have done a little bit more than that, right? We did a little bit of JavaScript object model work, perhaps, in 2010. We also know that there was a RESTful endpoint in 2010 that we could get to, listdata.svc. So we've been sort of fooling around maybe a little bit more. But still, a lot of us have really just been using JavaScript sort of to glue stuff together. So again, I want to sort of take you from 0 to 100 miles an hour and make you guys really good JavaScript developers in a short period of time. Okay, so let's talk about it here. So the very basics, right? Everybody in here has written a line of JavaScript code. So we know a few things about JavaScript right away, and these are the basics that we should know. So JavaScript, very loose about parameter passing. Did you know you could write a function, and that function can have, parameters in it, like A, B, and C in the function signature, but you don't have to pass A, B, and C, and you can pass more than A, B, and C, and JavaScript doesn't care, right? So you don't actually have to match the function signature. Instead, it gives you this thing called arguments, this array called arguments, which is built into the language that you can use to get to stuff. It opens up some interesting parameters, but I pointed out here just to show how loose the language is about things that you can pass in. Everybody in this room probably knows JavaScript is object-based, right? I can't tell you how many places I've been where there's a conversation about JavaScript and everyone goes, yeah, JavaScript's object-based. Not class-based, it's object-based, right? I'm not sure everybody understands what that means. I think that they really mean when they say JavaScript is object-based and it doesn't have classes is, it's not a real language. I think that's what they mean, right? So it's not a real language, it just has objects. But it turns out this is really important to us because we're going to be able to use this idea to create patterns in JavaScript that let us write things that are going to make us a lot more comfortable about the way we structure our code, things that even look class-based. And probably the big key to that is that JavaScript functions are objects. So we're going to see, right, most of us when we get started writing JavaScript, what we do is the first word we write is function. And we just write that right in the code, and we just write functions, and we kind of know JavaScript is this function-based programming language. But the functions themselves are really objects, and this turns out to be an incredibly important concept for everything that we're going to do going forward. We know JavaScript is case-sensitive because it's sort of like C# that way. Semicolons are optional but often used. You should always use them. And variables are only created using the var keyword. So there you go. There's your basics, and we can just blow past that. The first thing that we want to talk about, though, is what's called the global namespace. This is where all the bad stuff begins when people write JavaScript, in the global namespace. So the global namespace for us as SharePoint developers is in the window object. So the window object of the DOM is the global namespace. So why do you care about that? What do you mean? Because variables that are defined outside of a function, so if you just go into your HTML page and you go script and you say var and you define a variable there, they're going to be defined within that global namespace. So that basically means when you say var outside of a function, you're sticking something onto the window object. Any variables you define without the var keyword are also in the global namespace, no matter where they are. And that's a real issue because if you forget to use var and you just define a variable, it ends up inside the global namespace. So the reason that this is a problem, and probably the biggest problem in the way that casual developers write JavaScript, is because of name collisions inside the global namespace. So if I use a variable called myvar and you use a variable called myvar, we're going to hit each other when those two libraries get downloaded and run. So what we're going to do, the first technique we're going to learn, the first thing we're going to learn to make good JavaScript is create our own namespaces inside the global namespace. Additionally, we're always going to use something called strict mode. You'll see this in the code that I write. This is a big takeaway. I'll talk about it in the next session as well. Strict mode. Strict mode puts a lot of restrictions on the JavaScript code. You can think of it as a better version of JavaScript that will find problems for you and stop you from making the most common mistakes. Okay, but the big thing here is we're always going to create our own namespaces. So what does that mean? Well, here's some code right here that shows custom namespaces. So the idea here is in order to create your own namespace, JavaScript really doesn't have namespaces. It doesn't have that idea, but it has these objects, right? It's object-based. Everybody knows it's object-based. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable in the global namespace, but ideally the way that we're going to structure our code is to create one variable in the global namespace and no others. That's the ideal way to do it. So in this code that you see right here, I've created a new variable called wingtip, and that variable is going to encapsulate all the other code in my app. And so essentially what that does is creates like a namespace. Now that first line of code, if you don't really understand what's going on there, where it says window.wingtip equals window.wingtip or the curly braces there, what that does is that takes the variable wingtip, and if it has already been defined in another library somewhere, it picks up that value and gives it to you. And if it hasn't been defined, it makes a new object. And basically what it does is it makes an empty object. So a namespace is nothing more than an empty object. But you can see what happens is once you glue that to the window object, you now have a big container that you can play in without worrying about your names colliding with other people. And that's something we all understand, right? We all understand namespaces. So in the second line, you can then see that instead of gluing my variables to the global namespace, the window object, I can put them right onto the wingtip object. So now I have window.wingtip.singleton, and I'm creating essentially a namespace within a namespace there. And then after I get that done, I define a customer. So first key thing here is what you're looking at now where it says wingtip.singleton.customer. That's a variable, right? That's a variable customer inside the singleton object, inside the wingtip object, inside the window object. And the way that object definitions work inside of JavaScript is objects are just key value pairs. That's all they are. So you can see here that I have a key value pair. Name is Brian Cox, and then a key speak. And the value in that case is actually another function. So remember I said functions are objects, so this shows you how functions can be used in really cool ways, not as a function in the global namespace, but in this case, a function which is actually a member of an object. And the reason you care about that is demonstrated by the final line of code there, which is wingtip.singleton.customer.speak, which will execute the alert that you see. Now, as simple as this code is, right, already it should start to make you feel really good, right? If you haven't seen this type of stuff before, we're encapsulating our code inside of objects. It feels a lot better than what, the reams of functions that people typically write when they start JavaScript. And we have other patterns that get even better than this. But this is our goal, is to be able to write clean JavaScript that's contained inside of namespaces. Okay, so functions then become key to this way that we write JavaScript and ultimately in the way that we write apps using JavaScript. We said functions are objects. That's cool. And that means that functions can be stored. So they can be stored in variables. They can be stored in other objects, like we just saw. And they can be placed inside of arrays. They can be invoked directly, right? And we've done that many times. Again, that's the way most people invoke functions when they start JavaScript. But it's important to understand that there's actually 4 ways in JavaScript that you can call a function. And these 4 ways start to lend themselves to patterns of development that are very important in the apps that we write. The other thing to understand is that functions have a this variable, just like a class or an instance has a this. So what this points to is really important inside your code. So let's look at some examples of what I mean there. So the first way to invoke a function is using what we call the function pattern. This is the most common and clearly the worst way to invoke a function. So this is, again, what most people do. They simply write a function. It has arguments in it, and then they run some code against it, and they call it in a very typical way. So what's important to point out here, and hopefully everybody gets this right away as soon as you look at this, is this function add is defined in the global namespace because of the way I wrote it, right? Which means I better hope nobody else in any library I'm using defined a function called add, because last guy's going to win. Right? So this is not really something that we want to do, although again, it's probably the most common. Next is the method pattern. We saw this previously, but now we can give it a name, the method pattern. So when a function is contained within an object, we can invoke it like a method. So here we have a customer object. This is a literal JavaScript object with a name and a speak. And then we can invoke it using this method syntax. Even if you only used this pattern in your programming, you'd be head and shoulders above defining functions in the global namespace. And you can also see how attractive this is to us as object-oriented programmers. It starts to look like something we like. We also get the constructor pattern. Very interesting pattern here. So here's the scoop. Objects in JavaScript have what's called a prototype. And a prototype defines what the object will have, what members the object will have. Remember, objects are nothing more than key value pairs. So underneath that object is something called the prototype, which functions kind of like a constructor. So what we can do is we can define a function. Now this first thing says var customer equals function. Remember that functions are just objects. So when we say var customer equals function, we're taking that function and setting it to a variable. And then what we can do is we know that that function object has an underlying prototype. So in the middle there you see customer.prototype.speak. What we're doing there is adding a new member to the underlying object's prototype called speak. And that refers to another function. And then you can see that in this case we're using the this keyword. See this dot full name? Well, this dot full name actually addresses this dot full name in the function above. So the prototype gives you access to the various members that are here, and this refers to the object customer. So now you can see that in the first setup here where I define the function, I have like a constructor function. that's defining variables for the object. And then I can use speak to add methods to it. And now I can build up the prototype that I want until finally I come down here and I have a new variable, little c customer. And then I can use the new keyword, new customer, pass in the full name that you see in the constructor above, and then finally call my new method speak, customer.speak. So this is a very interesting pattern, right? Because it's this pseudo-object-oriented pattern. Because now I have something I can call a constructor. Now I have something that looks like a method. It looks like I'm extending some kind of underlying class. And I even have the new keyword to use that makes me feel pretty good if I'm an object-oriented programmer that JavaScript starts to look and feel a lot like this. So this is a pretty popular pattern, but probably not the most popular. In fact, some people feel this is really sort of a misleading pattern because it lets you feel like JavaScript is object-oriented when it really isn't. And there's some other patterns that, that might be better. And we'll see several as we write some apps here. Finally, there's the apply pattern. The apply pattern is like the opposite of the method pattern. So the method pattern is where you have a function defined inside of an object. In this case, what we have is we have our customer function up here with this first name and this last name, our constructor, right? And then we go ahead and extend the prototype to add a speak method, which is just saying my name is first name, last name, right? So hopefully that's pretty clear to you. And then I can go ahead and create a literal object down here that just has first name and last name inside of it. So this is a brand new object. It's a literal object with first name and last name. And if you look all the way down here at the bottom, you have customer, prototype, speak, which is this new method up here, and then apply. And see how I'm passing in the name object into the apply method? So it takes a literal object and then it applies the method to it. So like I said, it's sort of the opposite of the object.method syntax. It's like a method.object syntax. Not used very often, but one of the 4 ways that we can invoke functions inside of JavaScript. So right away, what I hope you're getting, if you haven't done any looking at all this stuff, is, gee, there's a lot more to JavaScript than I might have thought when I was writing some functions in the global namespace. Okay, so that stuff's all cool, and it brings us to one of our first key concepts here, which is the idea of a closure. A closure is this concept that says when you have a function defined inside of another function, the inner function gets access to the variables of the outer function. And that's kind of a concept we're all familiar with, right? It talks about the scope of the variable. How long do variables live? So inner functions get access to the variables of the outer function. The key thing here, though, is that if the inner function has a longer lifetime than the outer function, the variables from the outer function will still be available. Scratch your head about that for just a second. And you say, how can that be? How does the inner function have a longer lifetime than the outer function? And this shows you the module pattern here. So the way that we have an inner function with a lifetime longer than the outer function is we will return from the outer function an object that contains the inner function. So let me walk you through that. If you look up at the top here, let's go to the very first line of code. Window.wingtip equals window.wingtip, right? We should be happy with this. Everybody gets that I'm defining an empty object. If some other library also defined this empty object, I would just pick up its value here in this line of code. Wingtip.module just gives me a namespace inside of my namespace. Wingtip.module.customer gives me a customer variable inside module, inside wingtip, inside the window object. I set it equal to a function, which we can do because functions are objects. And then here's a really interesting thing. Look all the way down at the bottom at these 2 parentheses right here. You see that? This is what we call a self-invoking function. A self-invoking function. So ignoring everything inside the curly braces for just a moment, if you sort of erase this stuff with your mind, you'll see that this variable is calling a function which calls itself. So what is the variable customer equal to? It's equal to the return value of the function. See how that works? Because the function is actually invoked at this very moment. So what is the return value of the function? Well, it's down here where it says return, right? Because in JavaScript, that's how you return something. What are we returning? We're returning an object a literal object. See that? Key, value, key, value, key, value. So what happens is customer ends up being an object. But what are the values of the objects? Well, the key is set name, and the value of the object is set name. Up here, set name is a function. The key is get underscore name. The value is get name. Get name is a function. The key is speak, and the value is talk, which is also a function. So I'm returning the functions, the inner functions, as a return value of the outer function. Of course, when the outer function runs, the object that gets returned goes into customer. The outer function is no longer in scope. But because you're holding on to the pointers to the inner function, all the variables in the inner function are still in scope. Which means that if you look at talk down here, my name is name, but name is actually a variable inside the outer function. You with me on that? You can still say wingtip.module.customer.talk, and it will run. This is one of the most common patterns here. You're going to see it over and over again in stuff that I show you, this module pattern invoking a self-invoking function. What's cool about this, once you get away from sort of understanding the mechanics of what's happening here, you can treat it almost the way you treat a class. So if you come up here to the top, we actually have a concept now of private members and a public interface. So the private members are where you define all of, just like the members you would define for a class, you'll define those all at the top. And the only ones that will become visible outside of this function to the customer object that gets returned are the ones that you choose to return as the return object. You see it? So now you can have hidden code, right? You can have private and public code. And this starts to feel a lot nicer, right? Now I feel like I can structure my code into things that people can reuse. If you notice up here, just to make it perfectly clear, notice there's a variable called name. See the variable called name? But name itself is not returned. So no one can touch name. Instead, they have to use the getter and setter functions. Oh, we like that, right? We like that. Now we have getter and setter functions. That sounds pretty cool. So this pattern is a really popular one. Again, you'll see it in an awful lot of the stuff that I show you. And it's highly repeatable to help you write good apps. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these things. I'm going to go ahead and switch over here. All right, so the first app that I want to show you is just a simple, we're going to call it a membership app here. So I'm going to come up to my set of demos here. We'll click on the membership app. All right, so I just have this app over here, membership. We'll go ahead and click on it. It runs. There's not a lot of exciting stuff going on here. Here we are in a full immersion experience, right? So we can go back just to make sure we're all on the same page, right? We're on our SharePoint site here. And this is, just to make sure you get our terminology right, so you guys will hear it again. This is not the app, right? This is the SharePoint site that is hosting the app. That is properly called the host web. Host web. So inside the host web, we can come to the site contents. Click on the site contents here. And this shows me all the apps that are defined inside of it. And we're interested in running this membership app. So we're going to go ahead and click on this again. This thing right here is called the launcher. So we click on the launcher, and it takes me to the app. When I consume the entire page in an app, this is called a full immersion experience. Okay? There's 3 experiences you can have in an app. You have a full immersion experience, you can have a web part experience, and you can have an experience where you extend the ribbon or the ECB, the edit control block. Those are the 3 ways that you can surface apps. So we're looking at a full immersion experience here. And you can see that basically what this thing is doing is it's just going to the host web and it's reading the users list for the host web. That's all, pardon me, that's all it's doing. That's just printing out the users list. So inside of this we can see, pardon me, we can see some of our patterns. Frog there. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some code then and see how it was done. Okay. It seems like my res changed. Can we see this okay? Yeah, we can see it all right. Okay. I've got it open right here, and this is the membership app. Now, I don't know how many, pardon me, I can't get this frog out of my throat. It's not the internet, it's your throat. All right, so I don't know how many you've seen built, how many sessions you've seen built. I'll just touch on this real quickly, but if you want to do an app, right, you're going to come in and say New Project, and inside of here, you're going to pick Office and SharePoint, and then Apps, and then an app for SharePoint. And when you build an app for SharePoint, you can build three kinds, right? So you can build a SharePoint-hosted app. A SharePoint-hosted app is an app that uses only SharePoint artifacts, declarative SharePoint artifacts. If you can create it with an Elements XML, you're good to go. And it only uses client-side script. So the key thing about a SharePoint-hosted app is a SharePoint-hosted app can never, ever, ever use server-side code. It's illegal. It's forbidden. There's no mechanism by which you can use server-side code. I also believe that, well, let me back up for a second. So in that world, right, you have to write JavaScript. That's a really important thing to understand. If you're doing SharePoint-hosted apps, you're writing JavaScript. This is one of the reasons why it's a core skill now for us. And if you're an on-premises farm, right? How many folks are on-premises farms? There you go. Raise your hands, right? So this is the reality. On-premises farms. I think, after a year of doing this, that you're going to write a lot of SharePoint-hosted apps. Because your other alternatives are auto-hosted. An auto-hosted app only works in Office 365, right? How many folks are in Office 365? You guys can write auto-hosted apps, which is really cool because they're easy, right? You can also, if you're on premises, you can write provider-hosted apps. But provider-hosted apps mean that you have to set up a completely different infrastructure, right? So you can go set up your own IIS and drop an ASP.NET application there, which is really cool because that means you can do apps in ASP.NET or MVC4. All that stuff's really cool. But you got to roll your own infrastructure, manage the whole thing, load balancing, everything, right? All you're going to do is basically surface that inside of SharePoint. And that's a lot of extra work, right? So when I think about on-premises development, the easiest kind to do is a SharePoint-hosted app. SharePoint hosts the app for you, right? You can get to all the artifacts you need. Unless you really need to go after something outside of that, it's a pretty good thing to consider. So the point there is that that's an all JavaScript thing, right? So that's an important thing to remember when you're thinking about the different options, right? So in this case, we're going to show a lot of SharePoint-hosted apps. And I came in here to show you this pattern, okay? So we're looking at a module pattern here, or rather what we call a singleton pattern here. Let me show you how this works. Here is a variable called membership. And I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and you'll notice that this is not a self-invoking function. Not, because it doesn't have the little parentheses at the end of it. It's just a variable. So what is it that this variable is actually pointing to then? The answer is it's pointing to a literal JavaScript object. A JavaScript object is nothing more than a set of key value pairs. So what are our key value pairs in this object? Well, there's a key called element, which doesn't have anything in it. There's a key called URL that doesn't have anything in it. There's a key called init, which actually has a function in it. There's a key called load, which has a function in it, and this function is actually the Ajax jQuery Ajax function inside of that. Then there's a key called onSuccess that has a function, and then there's a key on error that has a function, okay? And then what happens is when you define this object that way, then we can use the object, membership, the variable directly, and we can call its members like init. This is known as a singleton pattern because you basically just get one thing, the variable itself. In this case, the variable is called membership. This is a pretty handy pattern when you're doing RESTful calls because lots of times you're going to set up a REST call and you really just want something that encapsulates the calls. You're not intending to make instances of any objects, if you will, right? You just want something that kind of encapsulates your code. So a singleton pattern is really very useful for that. So how many folks in here have done jQuery? Good. because you're going to need that, right? So I don't cover jQuery in great detail in this, but you're going to see it in everything that I do. jQuery is really important because jQuery does two things really, really well. It allows you to select things in the DOM, and it allows you to perform operations on them, all using much, much less code than you would need if you went against the DOM directly, right? That's the nutshell why jQuery is so popular. But jQuery keeps getting extended and extended, so we're using, and you will use quite a bit, the jQuery AJAX function that makes RESTful calls for you asynchronously. Now, let's go through this in a little bit of detail so you can see the pattern, because this pattern I'm going to show you, you're going to repeat time and time again. This is one of the basic ones. So I have this init method up here, this init function, which takes an element, and basically all this element is the jQuery element where I would like to show the results. That's all this is. So I'm going to initialize it by saying, here is the target element where results should be shown. And then I need to set the URL for this. So what I'm doing here is making a RESTful call. We'll talk more about REST probably in the next session, but this is just a RESTful call that is pointing at underscore API, right? That's our new REST endpoint for the API. Site, root web, lists, get by title. So this is looking for the user information list. This is just the good old user information list that you and I know from SharePoint, and I just want to read that out. Now here's another thing that's your friend, the underscore SP page context info. This guy right here, underscore SP page context info, has been around forever, but it doesn't really get used much. Basically, the ASP.NET pages in SharePoint put this on the page for you, and it gives you a reference, in this case, to the absolute URL of your host web. So this makes it very easy to construct a RESTful endpoint. And you can see that I'm asking for the user information list, and then if I do a break here, I'm just asking for the title and the name of the person. Great. So that sets me up with my RESTful endpoint. Now the load function itself, again, uses the jQuery AJAX right here. And you can see I'm providing the URL, which is the URL I just made. It's a get method. And then I have to say to headers what I want back. And this application JSON OData equals verbose is basically saying, give me back a JSON object. And the way that jQuery works with the AJAX function is it's an asynchronous call. So you have to provide success and failure functions. And here are my success and failure functions. And basically what I do when I succeed is I just hammer together an HTML table that has the results of the call. And then I use a little jQuery to just set the inner HTML of it, and that's it. Okay? So this is our first pattern that we can follow, which is just the singleton. So I'm not doing a self-invoking function. It is a literal object. And also notice the use of underscore document.ready. This is a jQuery thing, right, that fires when the DOM is ready. So this is also going to be really common in the apps that you make, that you're going to use underscore document.ready to kick off basically the initialization of your app. Okay. So that's the singleton pattern. Let's take a look at another pattern while we're here. This one being the module pattern with the self-invoking function. So I've got another one here, a JavaScript REST one. Again, all this code is available to you, so you can snag my patterns and just reuse them. But the one we're going to look at now is a self-invoking function. So here's wingtip.contactList. This is just performing CRUD operations against a contact list. If I scroll all the way to the bottom of all this stuff, you see these tiny little parentheses right here, and that's how you know it's a self-invoking function, right? That's your clue, it's a self-invoking function. You can see the return object here is returning functions called create item, update item, and remove item. And if I go up inside the module here a little bit, you'll see that I have create item, read all, read success, update, remove. So this gives you a good view of the structure of that module. I have all of those CRUD operations defined within the module as functions They come back to me through this return object right here, and then they can be invoked just like this, wingtip.contactlist.createContact, and then I pass in Brian Cox and his phone number, which calls the create item up here, which has last name, first name, and phone. Now, we'll go through this in a little bit more detail in the next session when we talk particularly about REST. Right now, we're really focused on the structure from a JavaScript point of view. But this pattern right here that has the CRUD operations inside a module, again, you can just sort of lift this and use it again and again and again, because basically what changes when you're using the RESTful API in SharePoint 2013 is the endpoint you're talking to. So a contacts list, a task list, whatever. You're just changing the list that you're talking to, but the pattern is the same over and over and over again. It's even true when you get to other workloads like search. So I have some search apps that I'll be building this afternoon, and basically I can follow the same pattern. I just point to the search RESTful endpoint and use this same pattern to execute queries against that endpoint over and over. So my point to you is steal this code, because that's how you're going to ramp up really quickly against the RESTful endpoint, rather than try to have to figure this stuff out all on your own. Okay, so those are a couple patterns there, singleton and module. Just checking my time here. Let's flip back and keep going. All right, so that's like, all the JavaScript stuff jammed at you in, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes, okay? Now what we're going to do is move on to talk a little bit about HTML5. So in all this stuff that we're doing with JavaScript and trying to make ourselves better JavaScript developers and trying to build apps that are compelling, HTML5 starts to become something that's really important. I mean, you could certainly just make apps that use HTML and CSS and some of the skills that you know, but as the browsers become more sophisticated, and the major browsers now, you get to IE10, right? IE10, the major browsers now all support the vast majority of things that are available to you in HTML5. So my point to you here is you should be biased towards writing your apps against HTML5. Obviously, you have to be concerned about what the browser is that's hitting you. We'll talk a little bit about how to know about that stuff going forward. But I think you should be biased about creating your apps for HTML5. The first thing so let's step back for a second and say, what is HTML5? So when people say that, what do they mean? Well, I think they mean three things when they say HTML5. They mean a combination of new tags in HTML, new styling in CSS3, they kind of lump all that stuff together, and new JavaScript functionality that we can use to introduce some new functionality like geolocation, right? So those are the three things that when people say, oh, is this HTML5 compliant? That's really kind of the vernacular of what they mean. They're really referring to those three things: the new HTML5 tags, the new CSS3 stuff, the new JavaScript functionality. So now we're going to sort of take a whirlwind tour of that stuff and give you some idea of what it's good for. The first place to start when thinking about the HTML5 stuff is with the semantic markup. So semantic markup introduces a bunch of new tags in HTML5 that are trying to specify the semantics of what parts of the page are good for. So, for example, you see here on the screen we have something called article. Well, the article element is really designed to define the content inside of your app that makes up the true content that you're trying to deliver. Some would say that the article is the stuff that you want to syndicate if you were doing RSS, and everything else is just sort of fluff that goes around it. You have other sections like the nav section, which is where you put your navigation. There's summaries for sections, headers and footers inside of that. And then there's this aside tag that allows you to do sidebars inside of it. So this semantic markup is more oriented towards publishing kinds of ideas that will be presented on your page. Now, the thing about the semantic markup, though, is it's really not any different than anything else. I mean, you could do this, and people are doing today. You could do this with a bunch of div tags. And then you could have a class called article, and a class called aside, and a class called footer, right? That's the way people do it today. But what happens when you when you buy into the idea of the semantic markup is it makes it easier for your stuff to be found by a search engine, right? Because it knows what an article is, and it can bias itself when people are typing keywords into it to say, well, this is really the stuff that's important when you're looking, you know, if you type sheepdogs into Bing, right, and you get 1,000 results on sheep, 1,000 results on dogs, and nothing on sheepdogs. Well, why is it? You know, because it can't understand the content that's there. But if it finds it in an article, it goes, well, this is really important stuff, so this is probably the kind of thing they're looking for. So semantic markup doesn't change your life, like suddenly give you a bunch of capabilities. It just helps those things that are working with your app to better find the content. Here's just a screenshot of a page that's laid out using semantic markup, just to give you an idea of how your app might use it. So for example, you can see up at the top we have the nav section there. So instead of defining a div, I'm using the nav section. My app title appears in the header section. The article is that main section here where it says the app shows some HTML5 incorporated into a CRUD app. My aside is over there on the right. It's not really the main part of the content, but it says, hey, click the help to see some current browser capabilities. And then the footer where we have that copyright notice. And then you can also see the figure and figure caption used over there. So it's, again, it's not that I couldn't do this stuff with divs, but it's going to help those things that are trying to make sense of my app, like search engines, to make better sense of them. So you want to think about doing that when you're structuring your apps. Next is HTML5 forms. I think this stuff is really helpful to us. These are new capabilities for forms that give us new types and new attributes that we can use in our HTML forms. You can see the different types. So you get lots of different data types like color, date, date time, email. You can see all of those. So these are now different kinds of input tags that you can use. Instead of just input type text, you know, you can do input type equals telephone, that kind of thing. And then there's a bunch of new attributes that go along with these that make them much more like the controls that we're used to, like autocomplete, autofocus, required, placeholder, things like that, allowing you to make a much more rich kind of form for user input than we've typically had in the past. Okay, let's take a look at one of those. Okay, I'm going to run an app for you here. And this one that I'm going to run is just a contacts app. So the idea behind this app that I'm going to show you now, this one I'm calling HTML5 Contacts app, is this has a bunch of the HTML5 stuff built into it. And I'm going to show it to you little bits as we go along to give you an idea of how you construct it. But right now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and run it for you so you can see what we do. So first of all, here on the welcome page, this is the page I was showing you previously. This is constructed using semantic markup. So you can see, you really wouldn't know that it was semantic markup, but it's broken out into articles and asides, and here's the aside over here, right? So you get that. We're also welcoming the administrator here using the image. And by the way, in the underlying code, I'm actually retrieving that image from the user's profile and welcoming them there, and that's all done using RESTful code as well. So just to be clear about this, you know, Microsoft has made a tremendous investment in this client-side API. All of us have been around for sandbox solutions, right? And in 2009 at the SharePoint conference, I presented sandbox solutions. I got to introduce them. And everybody went, oh, thanks, that was really good. Because the knock on sandbox solutions was, I can't get to the things I need to get to. How do I get to search? How do I get to BCS, right? I mean, it's great that I have a nice warm sandbox to play in, but how do I do what I need to do? And you could make that same knock on the app model in 2013, except for one thing. They gave us everything, right? So if you really haven't come to the place where you understand the magnitude of the client-side API in 2013, it's huge. You can do everything. So here I am, just as an example, pulling this person's picture and their name and basically their user profile information using a RESTful call. And we have similar access to search and business connectivity services and web content management and everything. So the point here is that you really never need to write a line of server-side code. We're going to be able to do it all inside of JavaScript, which is what we need if we're going to make the app model work, right? Okay, so that's our welcome page. If we go here and we just look at the contacts page, so here I am, I got a little navigation system going over here. I can go to the contacts page, and my little progress thing up here, that little weight, that's actually done in HTML5. I'll show you that in a little bit. It is not an image. And here we are with just a list of contacts here. So again, this is just CRUD against a contact list. I brought you in here, though, to show you this. So I'm going to come in here and say, let's add a contact. And so here is our HTML5 form. These are just input boxes. That's all they are, typical input boxes. But with the new attributes that are available to us, you can see we get a lot more capability. So these are required fields. So you can see, for example, the messaging, that first name is required. If you look really closely, is it showing up well? Yeah, it's showing up well on the screen. You can see the sort of gray placeholder text that's in there, suggesting to me the type of data that I might put in there. And then if I come in and I type into this, so we'll go ahead and add my name. Okay, email address. And a phone number. Okay. You can see that the form validates now, right? And then if you come in and you goof it all up, you can see that you'll get behaviors. I've told it to turn red when it's not valid, so you can see I'm boxing out the red. Other stuff that you get for free is that you get these little X's that show up over here on the right that allow you to just clear the field, right? These are all sort of common behaviors that we expect with apps that we're working on the internet, that experience. So, but the key thing here is not that we're doing it, but the key thing is that it now becomes really simple to do this type of stuff because HTML5 gives us this capability. So let's take a look at how that was done. So we'll go in here and grab the code for this. And again, we're just focusing on the form here. I have lots of other good stuff to show you in this app, but we're just going to focus on the form, which is here inside of New Contact. New Contact. So let's make it big. We'll scroll down a little bit. Now, don't look at this right here. Don't look at that function in the global namespace. Let's come down. This isn't the best practices session, so. All right, so let's come down here and we'll look at our form. I marked this because I'm using a table to make up the form. But do you remember when we used to do a lot of layout tables? Remember that? And then do you remember when layout tables weren't cool, right? And then we were just supposed to make divs and move them around with CSS. Well, now in HTML5, layout tables are cool again, right? Go figure. So I'm using a layout table here. And you can see, this is pretty simple stuff. So there's the first name. There's the input tag, right? Now, let's just look at what we're getting here. So this input tag, ID is first name. Its type is text. That's great. But look at these new attributes. Autofocus, required, and then placeholder. So just for adding these guys in, autofocus, required, and placeholder, what's going to happen with this first name field is the autofocus will move the focus to that field when the form becomes visible. So you can just start typing right there. Required is exactly what you think it is. It's required. And placeholder is what's putting that nice little grayed out placeholder text inside when I'm looking at it. So these are all new. And if your browser is supporting HTML5, you should expect these guys to work. Every browser is a little bit different. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Okay, we have required and placeholder here, so that's all good. Here's something new. Type is email. So now instead of a type equals text, we have a type equals email, which means it's going to validate against valid email addresses. That's kind of nice, right? So the field will be invalid if you don't have an email address in there, and you saw that in a little demo that I was doing. Here's a type equals telephone right there. It's required. It has a placeholder. Interesting thing to me about the type equals telephone is that you still have to provide a pattern with it. So you can include this pattern attribute inside the input in order to validate against a particular pattern. But because the combination of phone numbers vary so widely internationally, you're still required to put the pattern in there even though it is a placeholder telephone. All right, so this just gives you some idea of the type of stuff that's available there. Now, how do we make it work? Well, let's go now to the CSS here and just take a look at our validation CSS. Let's go into debug, not the release. We don't want the squished version. Let's get the unsquished version. Okay, so basically what you have now are you have these new pseudo classes. So you can see that I have an invalid pseudo class and a valid pseudo class right here. And this is how I'm bordering the input field in red whenever it goes invalid. So it's a combination of the type of field that you have, any validation rules like the pattern or whatever that's in that particular one, and then your CSS that says what a valid or invalid field should look like, and then it will change on the fly. So the point here is that this is pretty powerful and easy way to make input forms, right? And I don't know if you've noticed, but now that you see this and you understand HTML5 forms and what's happening, everything's kind of moving that direction. I've already seen a couple of vendors on the floor that have form tools. Have you run into these yet, right? So there's some form tools down there on the floor where they're making HTML5 forms. So you're doing dragging and dropping like we like to do, and they're generating HTML5 for you. And that's really the key thing for us as developers is that we're moving away from other types of technologies that generate forms, and HTML5 forms are starting to take center stage in what we do. So you want to be oriented around using HTML5 for your forms. Okay, jumping back. Other cool things we get, certainly HTML5 is full of multimedia and graphics stuff, right? So rather than needing a Flash player now, you can embed audio and video directly inside of your page using the audio and video tags. And they just play, which is really cool. You also get graphics, two key ways to do graphics here, the canvas and scalable vector graphics. So the canvas gives you a drawing surface inside the browser, and then you can write JavaScript against that drawing surface to draw things directly into the page. And this is where you start to see the JavaScript relationship to HTML5 start to kick in. Remember I said that HTML5 is like, it's this new tags, new style stuff, and new JavaScript capability. So Canvas gives us a drawing surface that we can draw on. Scalable vector graphics are pretty cool. This allows you to actually define scalable vector graphics in the page. And then, of course, the cool thing about scalable vector graphics is they grow and shrink without any distortion, right? So this is just showing an example of a star there that was made using scalable vector graphics. Okay, let's take a look at some of that stuff. I got another app for you here. All right, this is a paint app, right? Because you can't have anything new without, right? Somebody's got to do paint, and somebody's got to do weather. Oh, got to switch. You're nice for showing me that. Some people just let that go for a while and then go, we didn't see the demo. I had somebody do that in a session once. They got to tell me. All right. So, you have to have a paint app. You have to have like a weather app. And then, I don't know if anybody's done Minesweeper yet, but we got to have that, right? So, here's the paint. Oh, and a calculator, right? So here's the paint app. And the idea here is just to show you the canvas. So what I'm demonstrating here is the canvas. Now, the key thing to understand about what we're doing here is that this is just HTML5 and JavaScript. This is a SharePoint hosted app. It's just HTML5 and JavaScript. And I could come over here and hover over this thing and pick a color, right? So let's go ahead and pick purple, okay? And then I can come down into the canvas. This is a defined canvas. And then, I can just start to do some freehand drawing, right? Let's do this. Make a big face here. So does anybody know why babies are cute? Seriously, why are babies cute? The reason babies are cute is because their eyes and their nose and their mouth are very close together relative to the size of the head. True statement. Watch. Watch. You ready? So you take the eyeballs and you put them really close together, okay? Okay? And then they do this, like that, see? Yeah, isn't he cute? Tell me, look, come on, right? That's a cute baby. All right, let's take a look at that, how that was done. All right, let's grab the code for that guy, the paint one. Again, you can download all these. Every single one of these is available up there for you. So we're interested in the canvas one here. So I've got a library here called wingtip.paint. We'll go ahead and pull that open. Okay, so we're following all the good things that we've been talking about. I made myself a namespace right there. And then I have this paint object. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see it is a self-invoking function, right? And all it has is this init associated with it. And then if we come back up here, we can take a look at the init. So now what's going on here? The way that the canvas works is you define the canvas in the page, and then you use JavaScript to go ahead and grab it. So I'm doing a get element by ID. Now before we go any further, let's just jump over to the page real quick so you guys can see where that is. Check our time. Okay. All right, so scrolling down here, you can see the new canvas tag. So I have two canvas tags in this, in this app. The first one's a color picker at the top, and the second one is where you draw. Okay? So if you want to use a canvas, all you got to do is define it, just like that. What could be easier? And then we'll come over here to our function where we do an init, and you can see that I'm grabbing the two canvases that I defined, the main one and the picker one. And then you get the context of that canvas. That context that you grab right here, this is what's going to allow you to draw onto the canvas. So the first thing we're going to do is draw the color gradients for the picker. And you can see here that I'm using the context, and then I have create linear gradient, and I'm adding color stops and filling them in with the gradient. You can see a fill rectangle method here, which is defining a rectangle that needs to be filled in with color. So here you see that combination of new HTML5 elements like the canvas and new capabilities inside of JavaScript like this that are going to allow us to draw onto that canvas. And now with just JavaScript and HTML, I'm able to make something pretty sophisticated, no Flash required. Now we talk about the main one. The first thing I'm going to do is fill that rectangle. So you see the rectangle there with white, which basically clears it out. And then I have to pick up the events. So here is the mouse move event. Now again, I'm using jQuery here, right? jQuery is really a workhorse inside these JavaScript-based apps that we use, which is picking on that picker and saying when you mouse move over it, these are the things that are going to happen. Well, what are the things that are going to happen here? I'm basically getting the context of that color picker, getting the image data out of it, which that data is basically the color I'm hovering over, and I'm picking up that pixel that's being hovered over, and then I show you a preview of that pixel so you know what color you picked. And then if you click on the color picker here, this part just picks it, and you can see that I'm basically setting the RGB values. And then when you do a mouse down onto the canvas and move, here you can see that we're setting the image data now of the main one. There's the main canvas, setting the image data, and there's the R, the G, the B, and the alpha, which is the opacity, right, which we're setting to 255 so that it's solid, okay? So if you look at this, I think the point is that it's pretty straightforward in JavaScript to draw these images on there, and you can do some pretty sophisticated stuff. There's actually all kinds, like if you go searching for HTML5 games, you'll be amazed at the stuff that people are able to create using just HTML5 and JavaScript, no Flash. I tried to lift the Angry Birds thing off the internet and put it in an app, but I just couldn't get it to go. But if you want to have fun, go look for HTML5 Angry Birds. It's like a full, faithful rendition of Angry Birds done just in HTML5 technology. So it really gives you an idea of the magnitude of the capabilities. Okay, let's keep going. Got about 15 minutes left, so that's some multimedia and graphics stuff. Next is data and functionality. As programmers, we're going to really like the data and functionality capabilities. So again, it's new tags, plus style sheet stuff, plus new JavaScript functionality. This slide is focused on a lot of the new JavaScript functionality. So when it comes to data, we have these 4 key things: application cache, indexed DB, local storage, and session storage. The application cache gives you a cache that you can work on in your JavaScript app, so go ahead and cache some things. Indexed DB actually gives you like a little mini database that your JavaScript app can use. Pretty cool idea, right? And then you have local storage, which is a persistent form of storage. Think about it as cookies on steroids. And then you have session storage, which is a local storage that's only good for the session that you're in. So these are all the types of ways that we would want to remember data if we were making a full fidelity type of application. And provided your browser supports these capabilities, these would all be available to you directly through JavaScript. Other functionality stuff that's pretty cool, drag and drop is implemented. There's a whole thing on history now, so you can actually control the history, access the history, so you know that all those nasty problems you have with the back button can be dealt with. Web workers allows you to spawn new threads. Get that, new threads in JavaScript. So you can spawn a new thread, and you can point a library at it and say, please go execute that library. I have an example here we probably won't have time to do that that generates prime numbers, and it just goes, go over there and generate me a bunch of prime numbers. Post message allows you to send a message from a hosting web page into an iframe, or from an iframe into a host page. Why would you want to do that? Well, SharePoint relies on that heavily. Remember I told you one of the experiences that you can have is the surfacing of part of your app in a web part. And this is the new web part model. So we're not going to write web parts in the traditional way anymore. We're going to write an app, and we're going to surface part of that app in the host web. And people are going to see it up top and be able to pick it and drop it the same way they drop any web part, but it's going to be coming from an app. And then there's communication from the host web through the iframe that's showing your app into your app. So it allows your app to communicate with the frame that's hosting it. Really important. And out of the box, SharePoint gives you a message. It listens for a message that says, resize the window it's being shown in. So your app can say, I need more real estate, make your window bigger. And SharePoint will respond by changing the size of the iframe. Stuff like that becomes really important in this new model, being able to communicate across these iframes. And there's other places in SharePoint that's used, most notably in cross-domain communication. So another thing that becomes really important is, all of these apps are in isolated webs, right? Got that? They live in their own domain. So every time I want to talk to it, it's a cross-domain call, which should be illegal, right? Except we're allowed to do post messages across those domains, and SharePoint makes liberal use of that to allow your apps to talk to the host web. So post message is a really important part of the whole SharePoint infrastructure. WebSockets allows you to do socket stuff from your apps, so you could make like an SMTP app if you wanted to, that kind of thing. And finally, the one I skipped is geolocation, because I'm going to show that to you. Geolocation lets you figure out somebody's location and make use of it. So why don't we take a look at geolocation? So, yeah, I got a few minutes. All right, so I'm going to kind of take a little chance here. And let's see if we can... Okay, as soon as it works, how's that? No, I'm coming. All right, thanks for the switch. All right, so here I am inside of Windows 8. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and fire up the browser here. And I'm going to show you an app. This is the one I want here. Okay, so I got this WeatherBug app here, and the idea is that this is going to use geolocation plus WeatherBug to show me the weather. So if it likes me and we can get out to the internet, it's blinking, that's good. Really, the light's blinking. Come on. You know, it's all your guys' fault, right? Because everybody in here has a phone and a Surface, and you're using the wireless connection. Come on. It's trying. As long as it's blinking, I'm happy. Come on now. It must be really slow. I don't know, it's blinking. It's like trying to shove an elephant down a snake around here, I'm telling you. Oh. Except it says Hamden, Connecticut. That's interesting, huh? Must be cached. All right, well, here you go. Here it is. I was really hoping it would say Las Vegas, but it says Hamden. But you get the idea. So this goes out and makes a WeatherBug call, and it uses geolocation, right? So just like your phone app, it comes up and it says, you know, this app wants to track your location. Is that okay? In Windows 8, it'll come up and say, this app, this SharePoint app, wants to track your location. Is that okay? You answer yes, and then what it does is it gets your latitude and longitude, and then it'll go out to WeatherBug, and it'll say, give me the weather for that latitude and longitude. All right, let's take a look at the code to make that happen. Okay, so here's our WeatherBug. This stuff is actually pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to use geolocation. I have a library down here just called wingtip.geolocation. And in order to get it, all you have to do is call the get current position right here. So if it's valid, then what's going to happen is you have a success and failure callback here. So we've got the success and the failure, and all I'm doing then is saving your latitude and longitude into this. You can see I've got variables up here for the latitude and the longitude. So all you need is, the first thing is, in order to test whether or not the browser supports geolocation, you can just call navigator.geolocation, and then if that's good to go, then you can go ahead and say navigator geolocation get current position with a success and failure callback, and then you get the lat long that the person's in. And then, you know, WeatherBug, basically it just has a RESTful interface that allows you to pass the latitude and longitude, and it returns to you the 10-day forecast. So that's a good example of some of the, you know, capabilities that are in those new JavaScript libraries, but also pretty simple stuff to use, right? And so now you're adding that capability without much effort. Okay, let's hit the home stretch here. Okay, so the last thing to talk about is CSS3. So CSS3 is really all about styles, right? So it's just style sheets as we know and love them, but with lots of new capabilities. So if you have an HTML5 CSS3 compliant browser like IE10, then you get all kinds of new cool capabilities. So for example, in the backgrounds, we have background size and multiple backgrounds. So we can change the size of a background inside of our HTML, and we can even layer backgrounds together. So you can see here an example of where I've layered an image of the sun on top of an image of the sky with grass. Borders, I think this is a place where lots of us are going to take advantage of things. Border image, border radius, box shadow, and text shadow allow you to do rounded edges and shadows and things like that. And there's already tons of tools out there that you can find very easily that generate buttons for you. So rather than have to do this stuff yourself, you can pick some options and they show you a preview of it and you go, I like that. And it shows you the HTML5 and you just copy it out and stick it in your app, right? So this allows you to create much more interesting buttons and boxes and shadows. Graphics, animations, gradients, reflections, and transforms. This shows you just some stuff that I did in Internet Explorer 10 to make some various graphics. This is all done using CSS. So you can take text, as you see here, and you can rotate it, turn it, all that type of stuff is possible. Okay, so let's round this thing out then by just taking a look at some of that. What I'm going to do for you here is let's talk just a little bit about browser detection stuff. And I'm going to open up a new one here. So obviously, if you're going to go down the HTML5 route, you need to be very concerned about whether or not the browsers that are hitting you understand HTML5 and have capabilities for it. So I'm going to reference a library here called Modernizer. Modernizer, can you see that? It's like modern, I-Z-R, Modernizer. Modernizer's whole purpose in life is to allow you to determine the capabilities, HTML5 capabilities of a browser that comes in. So you can see I've built a library here that surrounds Modernizer that just allows you to do things like get audio or get background size, and it just returns to you essentially a true or false as to whether or not the browser that's hitting you supports that HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript capability. So you want to make sure that you get Modernizer for these things. And then, this final app I'm going to show you is a capabilities app. Let's see our cute baby here. And what I did with the capabilities app was I went to Modernizer, and for every single one of the things that's supported, I went ahead and asked, is it true or false? And that you can see the green over there if it's true, right? I'm in IE10, so IE10 doesn't do border image. That's false, okay? But wherever you see green, that means that the capability is supported. And then there's a sample of it over here. So, as you scroll down, you can see the rounded borders, shadows, the multiple images that I was showing you. These are all the different input placeholders and things which we've already talked about in some detail. Here's a movie actually embedded in here. I think this is Spider-Man, but I'm not sure. Let's see. I don't know. I'll have to hit the internet. That won't work, right? Here's the gradient stuff. You can see the rotated text, right? But the point here is all these cool things are done just using CSS. Just using CSS. Here's a scalable vector graphic right there. So you get a lot more power in what you can do with HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript stuff. And again, this little thing is available to you as well. You can hit it with all the different browsers and see how they render it. Okay. We're just about done here. All right, so in summary, what we did was, we took a whirlwind tour, right? I mean, we could spend a couple of days doing all this stuff. But my goal is really to get you guys from, I dabbled with some HTML and some CSS and some JavaScript, to really having vision of how these things would be used in your apps. So we took a look at the JavaScript stuff, how to correctly structure the JavaScript stuff. In the next session we're going to do in 15 minutes, I'm going to dive even deeper into these apps, and we're going to look harder at the actual structure of the apps and do things like MVVM. But here we just kind of got ourselves started and then give you an introduction to all the different capabilities of HTML5 to get the ideas flowing in your head, and finally the CSS3 stuff. And by my watch, we are right on the button. So I'm in here for the next session. I'll hang out if you have some questions. Other than that, I'm done. Thank you.